Okay, welcome back. Again, my name is Maggie Daly. I am the Education and Industry Relations Director for the Indiana Beef Council, and we are moving on to Volume 2 of our educational beef presentation. And on this particular segment, we are going to go over some of your carcass data as well as some consumer beef basics. Starting off with a great statement and a good look at your breakdown of your beef carcass. So, a 1,200-pound steer. Now, a steer is a male that cannot produce babies, so it is a castrated male. A 1,200-pound steer will yield about 500 pounds of retail cuts. That's from a carcass weighing about 750 pounds. Now, that 500 pounds, those retail cuts are just the stuff that we are going to eat, that finished final product. So out of that 500 pounds, 31% are going to be your steaks, 31% are going to be your roast, 38% is going to be your ground beef and your stewing beef. Again, this is going to change depending on the animal. Not every animal is going to weigh exactly 1,200 pounds or yield exactly this percentage. This is really just more of an average. Now, top 5 things to know as consumers. If you have eaten beef before or bought beef before, you are a beef consumer. By law, all meat must be inspected and pass their wholesomeness by the USDA, that is the United States Department of Agriculture. Again, they are in charge of all of your meat inspection. We'll go over that a little bit more in just a second. Quality grading is voluntary. Prime Choice Select are going to be your most common of your quality grades. You want to store fresh beef at less than 40 degrees or your refrigerator generally to help slow your bacteria growth. Your less tender cuts are generally going to come from your round and your chuck. Keep in mind that the shoulder and back end area of your animal. If you check out our first video, we go over that in a little bit more detail. And your most tender cuts are going to come from your rib and your loin. Again, we're going to find the majority of like your premium steak cuts, your filet mignons, your rib eyes. And again, if you check out our first video, you can see that in a little bit more detail. Now, by law, all meat must be inspected and pass rules by USDA, like we mentioned. Again, they are going to go over each portion, make sure that, again, that carcass and that meat is completely wholesome before going out to public consumption. So you can rest easy knowing that every portion of that meat is inspected and making sure it's safe for you guys to eat. Now, quality grading. This is also done by USDA. However, it is voluntary. That means not every cut has to have a quality grade on it before going to public consumption. Now, you're going to see more of your quality grades on your steaks, especially your premium steaks. And what makes a difference between these grades really comes down to that marbling and that tenderness. Prime is going to be the top end of your grades. It's going to be the most expensive out of your steaks because it's going to have the most amount of marbling. As you can see in some of this picture, all those little white flecks and white streaks going through that meat and that muscling itself, not really the trim fat. You notice each 3 of these steaks have a pretty consistent little strip of that trim fat along the outside. You really have to pay attention more to the marbling, those flecks of fat within that meat and that muscling itself. So prime's at top end, most amount of marbling. It's also going to be your most expensive. Those are going to be seen more in like your expensive restaurants. You can generally see a certified prime on their labeling in the restaurants. They will be advertising it as a prime steak. Now, choice steaks, these are going to have about the widest range. Again, they're not going to have quite the level of marbling that your prime steaks are. They're also going to be generally what you're going to see the most often. That's going to be in like your grocery stores, your Outback Steakhouse, your Texas Roadhouse, a lot of your more affordable steakhouse options. You're going to see more of your choice steaks. Again, it's just because it's not a prime steak doesn't mean it's not a great steak. You can find choice steaks with a really good amount of marbling, help give you that really nice quality once you actually go to cook it and eat it. Now, Select, you can see at the bottom, is almost entirely lean, has very little flecks of fats in there whatsoever, almost none, almost completely lean. So what that means is when you cook it without those little extra flecks of fat in there to melt and provide juices and provide flavor, it's going to be a little drier. It's going to be a little tougher. It's not going to be as flavorful or as easy to get through as your other 2 cuts. So again, keeping in mind it is going to be your cheapest, but you want to make sure having that little bit of marbling is just going to add into that nice juices, flavor, and tenderness. There's a reason why it's more expensive. It's because it's a very desirable quality to have those extra juices and flavor. Now, selection, picking the right cut, buying the right amount. We talked about in our previous video, little things to look for in your steaks and your ground beef and your roast, and comparing that to your recipe, how you want to add it, how you want to cook it, how much time do you have, how many people are you serving. So these are all things to keep in mind when you actually go to pick out your cut and to get the right amount. You want to make sure that you're getting exactly what you need. We don't want you wasting money when you don't have to. So making sure you know what you're looking for, making you more confident when picking out your cuts. Now, of course, you want to refrigerate your raw red meat. Now, again, this is going to slow your bacteria growth, and it's that 40 degrees or below. So ground beef is generally, when bought and fresh, ground beef is generally okay in your refrigerator for about 1 to 2 days. Your recipe ready 2 to 3, your steaks, your roast 3 to 4. Now, at that point, you really need to look at either freezing it or cooking it, of course, preparing it. Now, after a certain amount of time in your freezer, you can start to see some more. Again, it does help kill most of your bacteria, but you can start seeing a loss of some of those juices in that development of freezer burn if you leave it in your freezer for too long. Generally, ground beef is fine in your freezer for about 3 to 4 months. Steaks, roast, recipe ready anywhere from 6 months to a full year. So again, at that point, you really want to make sure to look at your defrosting them correctly and preparing them. Now, when it comes to defrosting, we always suggest defrosting them in the refrigerator. Yes, this is going to take the most amount of time. This is also the safest way to defrost. So especially with your larger cuts, you may want to make sure you're planning ahead. Making sure you keep in mind that a large cut of roast may take a couple days to completely defrost in your refrigerator. So just keeping that in mind and help giving you that best quality once it is defrosted and prepared. Now, conquering cross-contamination. Now, when you think of your raw red meat, you think of bacteria associated with your raw red meat, you think of E. coli. E. coli is a surface contact bacteria. Therefore, if you are touching that raw product and then touching other objects, you are transferring or cross-contaminating that E. coli bacteria to these other objects. Same thing if you are cooking it and you have your raw steak on a cutting board, and then once you cook it, you put that steak back on that same cutting board without cleaning and sanitizing it. That is cross-contaminating. When you are defrosting your cuts, once you put those in the refrigerator, you want to make sure you're keeping it away from all ready-to-eat items and making sure that if it does bleed and it does drip and melt and some of those other juices, that you are cleaning and sanitizing your fridge once you are done preparing those steaks and making sure it's not coming in contact with any other surfaces. Now, going over a quick review, kind of like we talked about in the first video, you're going to find more of your tender, more of your more expensive cuts in that rib, short loin, sirloin, where you're going to find the majority of your premium steaks. And your chuck and your round is where you're going to find the majority of your pot roast, as well as that brisket area right in that lower middle chest area. And that concludes our volume 2 for our presentations. And for our next volume, we will be discussing beef nutrition. We hope to see you there.